All right, so for this course, we've been looking at early Buddhist meditation in theory and practice. Now, one of the, again, just to briefly recap the course, we looked at the scope of early Buddhism, we looked at its response to the teachings at the time, we looked at the general overall purpose and shape of the Buddha's teachings. We looked at the practice of the three main meditation factors in the Noble Eightfold Path, right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi. We looked at the practice of reflections and recollections, and we looked at the wisdom teachings yesterday. I'm missing, that's the 8. What have I done? I've missed one. Contemplation, obstacles, right, the 5 hindrances. We did that one. So far we've covered a lot of that scope of how meditation is presented in the suttas. Now, many of you, or probably all of you, have some familiarity with the way that meditation is presented today. You've all you learned meditation, you've been to retreats, and so on and so forth. Now, obviously, there is a lot in the way that we see and practice meditation today, which is, basically the same as what you find in the suttas. People will talk about the 5 hindrances, they talk about practicing mindfulness and those kinds of things. But I think that there are also some other things, maybe some more subtle things that are a bit different and have a bit changed. And so I've tried to highlight these along the way, and just to sort of say, I'm not trying to propose that like everybody has to only do things that are found in the suttas and can't do anything else, right? I mean, I do metta meditation, which was drawn from a lot of things in the Visuddhimagga and which was expanded by my teacher Mahachacha, and it's a really beautiful meditation. And so I'm not trying to be fundamentalist about this and say, only do what's in the suttas, I'm just trying to say that if we want to understand and practice Dhamma, then we should know what is in the suttas, we should know how to read it, how to interpret, how to understand it, how to find the things that are there and the things that are not there. And we should be able to see, which if someone's teaching us something, okay, these are the things that the Buddha taught, these are the things that are added onto it, and we should have a sense of discernment and critical understanding so that we can sort of help to make sense of this very complex and diverse Buddhist world that we find around ourselves. Now, if you want to practice meditation, do whatever meditation you like. I don't care. I honestly could not care less. I think there are many things in the world to care about. Nuclear stockpiles, bad, we should care about that. Global warming, absolutely. Inequality, yes? All of these things are things that we should have strong opinions about, and we should try to change them. But if somebody wants to meditate, good on them. I don't really care how you go to meditate, right? And as long as, if there's some problem or something and you need some guidance or something to help you, then we can look at the Dhamma to try to find something to help, that's all. So, among the things which we can see are a bit different in the way that meditation is presented in early Buddhism compared to modern times, for example, the emphasis on meditation techniques. And so I've said a few things about this along the way. And again, it's not that it's wrong to have meditation techniques, but I think that sometimes that we focus so much on meditation techniques that we lose the context which gave those techniques meaning. And we can see that in the suttas there was more emphasis placed on the context and rather less emphasis placed on the techniques. I've also tried to highlight a number of places where the Buddha was clearly not particularly deterministic in how he taught. For example, the recollection of death, where he had obviously taught that and people were practicing that in different ways. So the Buddha allowed for a sense of creativity and a sense of imagination. People have to be able to find their own way to practice. And this is something that I also found in the Thai forest tradition, much more so. Like these days, the meditation techniques that people use are usually the Burmese techniques, where this is not really emphasized. But in the Thai meditation tradition, there's much more of an emphasis on finding things out for yourself, learning how to do things, experimenting. And they're not so fussed about the details of the meditation technique. So, considering the topic of mindfulness of death, I remember when there was a student who was there. It was actually the mother of one of the Western monks who went to Thailand. I was staying at Ajahn Dun's monastery, so he's one of the best known meditation teachers in the forest tradition. And she asked him about mindfulness of death, maranasati, and she wanted to know how to do it, and he gave her some simple instructions, as is his way. Ajahn Dhan, one of the most sort of renowned meditation masters, and his meditation teaching is always very, very simple. I stayed there for like a month, and every day at the dana time, he would tell people, be generous, keep your precepts, and then when you get a chance, do some meditation and watch your breath. And that's it. That's his teaching. I'm like, well, I can't fault it, right? Right? And he keeps it simple and keeps to what is really essential. And so when he was speaking with this lady, he said about recollect death and be mindful and so on. And then she said, but like, how do I do it? And he said, well, you just got to try and see. She said, but like, how do I know what the right way to go about it? And he said, well, if you have that feeling where you can actually feel that sense of dispassion and you feel that sense of connection with it, then you know that it's working. Or how do I make that feeling happen? Well, you just try it until you see. Yeah? And so he wasn't wanting to give people all of those answers. And I think this is part of the thing. We've seen examples like the Madhupindika Sutta. The Buddha gives a short teaching and gets up and leaves. And it's okay. It's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to not have everything explained for you. So we explain things to get people started, to give people a path, but ultimately we have to learn to find the answers for ourselves. So these are some of the areas where I think that there's a bit of a difference between modern meditation and what's taught in the suttas. I mean, another one, obviously this pure vipassana practice is not really taught in the suttas. The suttas always have a balance of samatha and vipassana. The things like, say, the emphasis on like concentration rather than immersion is another one I think is a bit different, and so on. So there are some other things, but they're more by way of like a perspective and emphasis rather than anything which is really fundamentally different. And it is the case that there are some meditations that are quite fundamentally different. Thank you. There are some kinds of meditations that are really fundamentally different from what we find in the suttas. For example, some people will practice various tantric meditations where you're like kind of invoking various deities, invoking magical powers and black magic and all of these kinds of things. I don't know much about all of that stuff, I'm afraid. Okay, we don't find it in the suttas. In the suttas, it's just the boring, like watch your breath and parts of the body and elements and that kind of thing. No black magic and things like that. So if you want to learn how to put curses on somebody or to predict next week's lottery number, then you're going to have to try somewhere else, but that's not going to come from suttas. So for today, for the last session, we're going to look at Samatha and Vipassana. And Samatha and Vipassana, of course, important teaching in early Buddhism, and has become even more important over the years. But the meaning of Samatha and Vipassana has changed a little bit over the years. So let's have a look at some of the suttas that talk about Samatha and Vipassana, and then let us consider what their kind of meaning are. What their meaning is. Very good. So this is a really nice little sutta here that really summarizes the perspective of the suttas on Samatha and Vipassana in a very in a way that's very very simple and straightforward, but also really interesting and insightful. So this is one of my favorite suttas on the topic. Okay, so let's break it down a little bit. And have a look at the elements of this sutta. So these two things play a part in realization. So the word I'm translating as realization here is vijja, okay, otherwise translated as knowledge, and bhagya, okay, bhagya. So bhagya is a share. So vijja bhagya Dhamma are things that have a share in realization or things that play a part in realization. All right. I'm going to take this a bit slow, so any questions along the way? No? We're good? Ling? Well, it means that they each have a role to play. Yeah? Two things each have a role to play. Yeah? Does that make sense? Yeah. What two? Serenity and discernment. Samatha cha vipassana cha. So you might have noticed that I don't use the normal translation of insight for vipassana. And why do you think that is? This should be fun. Why not use insight? Everyone uses insight for vipassana, right? It's like part of the vernacular. I mean, there's a gazillion meditation groups and Dhamma centers and everything all called insight because it's after vipassana. So why am I going to be stubborn and pig-headed and just not do the same thing as everybody else does? What's wrong with me? Sorry? Thank you. Exactly. Yeah. Insight is something that occurs. Yeah. It's not an actual practice. Yeah. And again, it's one of these things. Insight's not a bad translation. It's not a wrong translation, but it's kind of also missing a little bit of the point, right? So insight, if you like, is the realization or the understanding that emerges through doing vipassana practice. Oh, I had that moment of insight, but it's not something that you do. So yes, excellent. So discernment. So let me just check. Are there any lawyers in the room? Really? So if the police want to interrogate me, I've got no one to back me up. Okay. No, that's not what I meant. I actually gave a talk in a legal practice a couple of weeks ago, and we're talking about this. And I pointed out that both the word samatha and the word vipassana are legal terms. Right? And if we look at how they're used in the early suttas, apart from this context, a legal context is one of the main ways in which they are used. That's interesting, isn't it? Yes? Okay. How are they used in a legal sense? Well, let's have a look. Okay, so samatha. Okay, let's have a look at how samatha is used in a legal sense. Here we have the settling legal issues, adhikarana samatha. Okay. Settling of legal issues. So this is the wording here is because this is a part of the Patimokkha. So when we recite the rules for the monks and nuns, this is like the last portion actually that we recite. Imeko panayasmanto satta adhikarana samatha dhamma vidisanga gachanti. And for the settling and resolving, upanupananang adhikarananang, so of adhikarana. Okay, so adhikarana is a legal issue or a legal case. Samataya, vupasamaya. Yeah? So this is settling and resolving. So vupasama is another word to mean peace. Yeah? Vupasama commonly used in the suttas in meditation to mean peace. So for the settling of legal issues or legal cases that have arisen. And what this refers to in the Vinaya is essentially anything where, say, a monk has done something wrong or a nun has done something wrong, or where a case has been brought in the Sangha, somebody has accused something of somebody, or even accused somebody of something, then that can be brought up to the Sangha, and then there can be various methods that are applied to resolve that. I'll briefly go through these. These are all explained elsewhere in the Vinaya, so this is just listing the ones. Sammukha Vinaya means face-to-face or in the presence. And so that means that whenever you have a legal issue, it has to be done in the presence of the person who is concerned. You can't try somebody in their absence. Sati Vinaya Databo, resolution through recollection to be granted. In certain cases, a case can be dismissed because of the accurate recollection of the person involved. all right? So somebody says, oh, I thought I saw you, breaking into the monastery stores and stealing a new robe. And the person says, but look, I wasn't there. I remember where I was that night. I was in somewhere else, and that wasn't me who was doing that. So in certain cases, if somebody has an accurate recollection, that's sati vinayo, right? They have their mindfulness. They know what they were doing. On the other hand, is the next one, amul havinayo databo, right? If you have gone crazy, then you can get away with it, okay? So if you've gone completely nuts, you can do whatever you want in the Vinaya and you're good, okay? And afterwards you could just say, I went crazy, and everyone goes, okay, you were crazy, never mind, right? Yeah, again, similar, these are similar to kind of modern law, right? Similar kind of thing, yeah? Yeah, insanity, yeah. So when they're talking about that, I mean, they seem to be, psychologically, what they seem to be referring to is what psychologists today call a brief reactive psychosis. So where somebody has like a breakdown and their mind's completely out of control. Obviously it's not talking about, if you're suffering from depression or something like that, but in a case where you have no comprehension of what you're doing. Patinyaya kareta bang, okay, acting according to what had been admitted. So if an accusation is being brought, then if the person confesses to it, then you do the procedure and you settle the procedure according to what has been confessed. Majority decision, yebhui yasika. Majority decision is only used in very rare circumstances in the Vinaya. Almost all the time, the Vinaya requires consensus. So you have to have the agreement of all of the monks or all of the nuns in the community to be able to proceed. And there are certain, usually fairly marginal cases where consensus is not required and where a majority decision can be acceptable. Okay. Tasapapi yasika, by a further penalty. Okay. So this is cases, further penalty, is that a good translation? Oh, this is Brahmali's translation, right. I was thinking why I translated it like that, and then I realized, oh, it's not my translation. Tasapapi yasika. Further penalty. I'm not actually sure about that. Hang on, let me check. Just seeing if I've got a translation of it by myself. Yeah, I translated that here. So I translated that as recovery from madness, acknowledgement of defense. Right, I called it a verdict of aggravated misconduct. Yeah, a verdict of aggravated misconduct. I might actually discuss that with Brahmali and see why he chose that translation. So basically what that means is that somebody has, a character witness can be brought against somebody. So if an accusation has been made, then if somebody is habitually of bad behaviour, then that kind of character witness can be applied in that case. And then the covering over, as with grass, is that if there are many issues, especially if there are many minor issues, trivial issues, and everybody's disagreeing and so on, then you just say, let's just put some grass over it and just pretend it never happened. Okay? So this is like a last resort, and it only happens if sometimes the process of settling things becomes more divisive than the actual issues at stake. So you're better off to just say, look, let's just forget about it. But again, that's only in the case if there are many small trivial issues that need to be settled. So these are the 7 adhikarana samattas, so 7 principles for the settling of legal issues. And so this is showing us the meaning of samatha in a legal context. Interesting, right? I think it's interesting. Yeah. Oh, really? Okay, so samatha uses the settlement in sinless. Oh, I did not know that. Okay, there you go. Right. In the rural areas. Like land disputes and things like that? Right.
Samatha Mandala is also there, sort of before the fourth.
Okay.
Sort of like arbitration type of.
Okay.
Also for
Like an arbitration commission. Okay. Yeah. That works. Yeah. Right. So didn't make the connection, right? It so often happens in language, right? I mean, we do the same thing in English all the time. Actually, two words are connected, but you don't really realize it. So this is useful, and it's useful because it shows you that, like, why was the Buddha using this word? Like, what are the connotations for the word? Yeah, and so it's used in that kind of ordinary sense of settling a dispute. With grass. Yes, covering with tina. Tina is grass, yeah. Tina wa. Okay, the other major usage that Samatha has is in the Four Noble Truths, where here, the Four Noble Truths, where the Nibbana is described as being a samatha. No, actually it's not there. Dukkhaṃ nirodhaṃ. No, actually different passage, yeah, Sabba Sankhara Pasamatha. Sorry. Right. Is it 10.6? Okay, so this is a passage which we find a number of places in the suttas. This is peaceful. Etang santang, etang panitang, yadidang sabbasankara samato, sabubali patinisago, tanhakayo virago nirodho nibbananti. This is peaceful, this is sublime, that is the stilling of all activities, the letting go of all attachments, the ending of craving, fading away, cessation, extinguishment. Yeah? So in this case, sabbasankara samato. So I've translated it as the stilling of all activities. Yeah? So in this particular, we've talked a bit before about sankhara and how it's used in different contexts. So in this case, because you've got, so sankhara, the basic meaning of it is energy or activity. So we sometimes translate it as choices or conditions according to context. But in this case, because it's something which is stilled, then we have to translate it as activities. Yeah? So activities are stilled. So this is where sometimes you can't be too overly consistent with things. Like if you try to translate it the same way all the time, then you end up with odd translations. You know, you might say the stilling of all formations. But how is a formation stilled? It doesn't really work. Anyway, so this is Nibbana. Yeah. So Nibbana is a samatha. Yeah? Stilling of all activities. Okay, we good? Yes, the same meaning, yeah, exactly, yeah. And we say, like, even vipassana, we saw in the legal context as well. Yeah, same word, yeah. The samatha and vipassana. Oh, one just word note is the word samatha and the word samadhi sound similar and have a similar meaning, but they're actually completely different words that merely coincidentally sound the same. Samatha is from the root sama, meaning even or steady. Samatha is actually the same as the English root same. So samatha is literally sameness, whereas samadhi is from a root to bring things together. Yeah? Okay, so that's samadhi. What about vipassana? Where do we find vipassana used in a legal context? Not so often, and not in such a sort of straightforward technical way, but we do find it. Where do we find it? We find it in the story of the Buddha Vipassi. So in the Mahapadana Sutta, which is Digha Nikaya number 14, we have the legendary tale of the Buddha Vipassi, one of the Buddhas of the past eons. And actually this tells about 7 past Buddhas, but Vipassi, it actually tells his story in quite a lot of detail, and it's quite interesting. So it gives his name and so on and so forth. So I won't go into all the details of Vipassi and his life, but I will just skip right ahead to, and then they have the whole thing, like the examination of the marks, and he's going to be a wheel-turning monarch and all of these things. And then the description of his life. Okay, but the part that is going to be interesting for us is the question of why he is called Vipassi. Okay, so the word Vipassi, of course, is just a name derived from the same word as vipassana, right? So the word Vipassi means one who has vipassana, right? So this is telling us why he was called Vipassi. From when he was born, Prince Vipassi had the power of clairvoyance, the Dibbachakku, which manifested as a result of past karma. We talked about this before, about how these psychic powers usually are said to come from 4th jhana, but actually sometimes also, as here, manifested as a result of past karma. He could see for a league all around by both day and night. So he can see everything that's going on all around. Okay? And he was unblinkingly watchful. Yeah? Animisanto Bekati, like the gods of the 33. And because it was said that he was unblinkingly watchful, he came to be known as Vipassi. Vipassi. Yeah? So clearly here, like one of the literal meanings of vipassana means like clear seeing. And clearly that's what's being meant here, right? So it's emphasizing the fact that he can see very clearly. And whether you how seriously or how much you want to take the supernatural aspects of that is up to you. But the basic idea of the passage is that he was seeing very clearly. Was it really the case that he could see for a league around at night time? I do not know. It was a long time ago. Maybe he lived in Finland. The midnight sun, I do not know. But anyway, it tells us what the meaning of the word is. Why is he called Vipassi? So that's one reason, clear seeing. The other reason is that while King Bandhuma, that is his father, was sitting in judgment, Attakarane Nisino, he'd sit Prince Vipassi in his lap and explain the case to him. Yeah? Nisida Petwa Atte Anusasati. Yeah, the legal case. And sitting there in his father's lap, Vipassi would thoroughly consider the case. Yeah? Vichaya atte. Panayati nyayena. Yeah? Vichaya, thoroughly consider it. Go over it again and again. Draw a conclusion using a logical procedure. Nyaya. Remember in the recollection of the Sangha that we recite, Nyaya Patipanno? Yeah, the same word here. So it means according to method, according to a logical procedure. So this was all the more reason for him to be known as Vipassi. No? So this is the second reason. So there are 2 senses here to the word Vipassi. First one is clear seeing. Yeah? The second one is being able to draw a conclusion or to infer. Remember the other day I talked about inference and the role of inference. Yeah? Both of those 2 things are included here. And it's very careful to include both of those things. Remember that it's fundamental to Buddhist epistemology that we have these 2 aspects, a direct perception and inference. And so it's quite conscious that both of these two things have been included here. So vipassi and vipassana means clear seeing of what is there, and it means inferring, being able to generalize from that experience. Yeah? So this is why I chose the word discernment for my translation of vipassana, because discernment is a sense, has a meaning of being able to see something clearly, right? I could discern that shape even in the fog, right? But also has a sense of that wisdom and that understanding, so that you can know the context to be able to make correct inferences from things. Yes, Deepika. Yes, Pachaka and Anumana, yeah. Linguistically, it's not related. No, different words. Meaning includes both of those things, yeah.
So Pachaka, do you think like sometimes punctuate, like think about it afterwards and
yeah, no, it's different, yeah, in that case. So that's correct, yeah. The prefix is pati, okay, so pati is the prefix. And pati, when it comes before a vowel, changes to pach. So this is why it's pach. But yes, and pati or pacha can often mean like reflective, afterwards, the basic meaning of it. But in that pachaka, it has a sort of a sense that it is right there in front of you. Yeah. That's right, pachavekanān, yeah. That's another term, yeah, slightly different meaning, yeah. Actually, the word pachaka is only used in that sense in later philosophy, I think. I don't think we actually find it in the suttas. Yeah. 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 Okay, we good? Everyone else good? Vipassana, discernment, insight? So you can see that like insight wouldn't actually really apply in either of those cases. It might apply in the second case again, I guess, but not so accurate. I mean, again, nothing against it. It's a nice word, actually. But just to sort of, as a translator, I really want to try to figure out what these things mean in those contexts. We good? Now's the time. Last day. If you don't ask any questions. Thank you, Ravi. Sorry? Samatha and Samadhi. Okay, so Samatha and Samadhi, generally speaking, are synonyms, right? So they basically mean the same kind of thing, okay? But they also have a slight difference in perspective. Samatha is more about the general process of stilling and finding serenity in your mind, yeah? Whereas Samadhi generally refers to the specific states of mind that result from the practice of Samatha. But again, generally they're used in similar ways. All right. We good? Adrian?
So I understand. So the vipassana, that can occur after we come out of the jhana.
We will see about that later on. Yes. But yeah, sure, it can. Yep. All right. Madhu. Not really. No, contemplation's a bit too specific. I mean, usually when people say contemplation, they mean to think about something in a reflective manner. Yeah? But that's not real. I mean, that can be something which contributes to vipassana, but it's not really what vipassana means. That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sorry to interrupt you, Lucy, but even if you see this particular one, why is he called vipassana? Because he would first thoroughly consider the case, vichaya, or we could translate that, thoroughly contemplate the case, and then draw a conclusion. So that contemplation is like a part of that process of vipassana, but it's not exactly the same thing. Okay. Are we good? Madhu? Yeah. knowing is very general, right? Knowing is one of the most overloaded terms in the Pali Canon. Oh my God, how many times you have to translate knowing? So try to disambiguate a bit. But look, it's not wrong, but it's a bit unspecific. Inspecific? Unspecific. It's a bit unspecific? Unspecified? Poorly specified. Ambiguous. Anyway, moving on. You see, I mean, here we can't even use English when we're trying to read Pali. It's ridiculous. Okay. Oh, vichair. Okay, that would be from a different root in Pali. So in Pali, that would be spelled with a CH. That would be vichair. Yeah, cheda, to cut into bits. Yeah, that would be like some of the words you see in the like in the death contemplation as well. The corpse being divided into parts. Yeah, different root to vichaya. Let's see. This is sorry to interrupt again, but this is the same root as you find in like Dhamma vichaya. Yeah. Yes. That's correct. And the prefix is we, yeah. So, and in this case, it seems we has, certainly in the first one, the we is like an intensive, like clear seeing. Yeah. Yes. Right. Okay. Yeah. Vidarshana, you don't really find that in the Pali text, I think, at all, but it is quite a common synonym in the Sanskrit text, yeah. I don't think you find it in the suttas at all, actually. I'll just check. Yeah, no, you don't find it in the suttas at all. Okay. Ling, is that a hand up or is that a vidarshana that you're doing there on that thing? So it was a vidarshana. That was vipassana, right? You're looking at what goes underneath the thing.
That's right. Yes. Put the good into practice.
Yes. Okay. We good? Everyone good? Any questions on the basic, fundamental meanings here? So let's return to our text. So here we've now talked about the fundamental meaning of samatha and vipassana. Samatha, serenity or settlement. Vipassana, discernment, clear seeing. What is the benefit of developing serenity? Samatho bhavito, kamatano bodhi. Mind is developed. Chittang bhaviyati. What's the benefit of developing the mind? Yo rago sopahiyati. Greed is given up. So here, just a few notes as we go along. First of all, notice how samatha is used together with the word bhavita. Yeah? And so is vipassana also used together with the word bhavita. Yeah? Bhavita is the same as the word bhavana. So a more literal translation is when samatha is developed, what benefit is produced? Something like that. But what is the benefit of developing serenity is more idiomatic. The point here being that both of these as bhavana means that they relate to which of the Four Noble Truths? The path, thank you, number 4, right? Bhavetaba, yeah, to be developed. Yeah? So both of these are things that are to be developed, i.e. to be grown. Remember, bhavana means to grow something, to make it bigger. So samatha and vipassana are both things to be developed, to be made more of. Now when we develop serenity, the mind is developed. Now the mind is citta, and it's used in many ways in the suttas. But curious, why here does it say the mind is developed? Later on, it says if you do vipassana, then wisdom is developed. Surely wisdom is part of your mind, right? Isn't wisdom an aspect of your mind? No? We have a hot take coming here from Aya in the corner. Wisdom is not in the mind. Tell us. It's a very... So wisdom is the result of developing your mind, but it's still part of your mind though, isn't it? I mean, wisdom happens in your mind. Sure, I agree with you. Wisdom is a result of developing mind, sure. But it's still part of your mind though. Why do you develop your mind in one bit and then you develop wisdom in the other bit? Radha. This is what Aya is just saying. But it doesn't actually really say that, does it? Actually, both of them are part of the development, these other developments. So I'm not saying you're wrong there, but I'm just saying I'm not fully satisfied. Nilushi. Okay, so the mind is more general, wisdom is more specific, and you made the connection there between the holistic nature of samadhi, yeah? And I think there's probably something to that. So in the suttas, the word citta is used in many different ways, okay? We saw, for example, Talaputta, who was like reproving his citta all the time. You know, with citta means thought, it means emotion, it means mood, it means intention, it means all of these different kinds of things, according to context. But commonly, and specifically in the context of the fourth noble truth, in the path, citta means samadhi. Citta bhavana means samadhi bhavana. Citta sampada, the endowment with the mind, means samadhi sampada, endowment with samadhi. The citta iddhipada means the same thing as samadhi. Even in the four satipatthanas, we saw there's a close relationship between cittanupassana and samadhi. Yeah? So citta, when it is in the context of something to be developed, right? To be developed, citta bhavana, is very close in meaning to samadhi. Now that doesn't mean it's necessarily identical in meaning, because it's still a bit broader than that, right? But generally speaking, when we see the words citta and bhavana together, then we're talking about samadhi, more or less, right? We're in that kind of realm of development, okay? So we can then translate this as something like, what's the benefit of developing serenity? That samadhi is developed. Yeah? This is what it means. More or less, right? I mean, again, the word citta in this case is a bit broader, but that's the basic idea here. Yeah? So what's the benefit of developing the mind? Right? What's the benefit of citta bhavana? Yo rago so pahiyati. Greed is given up. Right? Greed is given up. So the development of samadhi, of course, is there to overcome all of the hindrances and all of the different defilements and greed, hate and delusion and all of these different kinds of things, right? But especially what samadhi does is samadhi works at an emotional level, right? It works at an emotional level. We develop metta, we develop peace. Yeah? We develop all these kinds of things that have a unifying heart quality to them. And when we see raga, raga on the one hand means disaster or liar. Disaster and liar, or desire and lust, take your pick. Too many Dhamma talks in the last 10 days was all I'm saying, okay? So raga has the direct meaning of meaning desire and lust, okay? But also when we see raga and avidya used together, okay? Or tanha and avidya, sometimes we also find, right? That in those cases it has a slightly more general sense where it's actually talking about those emotional defilements. Yeah? It's not like specifically meaning that, but that's like the connotation of it. So think about raga here as meaning like the emotional defilement. So obviously we do samatha to also do metta and so on to overcome hate as well. So this would also be included. So all of those kinds of things that are defilements on an emotional level tend to be overcome by the development of serenity, of samatha. Yeah? So what is the benefit of developing discernment? Yeah? Panya bhaviyati, right? So wisdom is developed. Okay, so again here, so vipassana. So again, just to notice, right, that samatha is the practice that is done, that process that leads to the development of samadhi. And samadhi, and the purpose of developing that is to give up those emotional defilements such as desire and lust. What's the benefit of developing discernment? Again, why do we undertake that process of practicing to develop this? To develop our wisdom, to grow our wisdom. And why do we do that? So that we can give up ignorance. Yeah? So these are the two aspects of meditation. So notice that one of the things that's really interesting about this passage is that it doesn't quite say what is often conventionally said about samatha or vipassana, which is that you develop samatha and then that suppresses hindrances, and then you do vipassana and then that will get rid of hindrances forever. Yeah? It doesn't actually say that, right? Actually, there are two aspects of it. And again, it's not that that's completely wrong. Okay? I don't want to say that's completely wrong as a model, but I'm just saying that there's another way of looking at it where actually each of them have their own role to play in overcoming different aspects of the defilements. Yeah? And so there's not like you can substitute one for the other. They both have an essential role to play because both of us have these issues at an emotional level, greed, desire, hate, and so on, and we overcome those through letting go of greed, through development of metta and compassion, and so on and so forth. And we also have that delusion and that ignorance, and we overcome that through the development of wisdom. And so the development of benefit of developing wisdom, we then give up ignorance. And obviously both greed or craving, right, raga or tanha, and avidya are fundamental defilements and fundamental roots of dependent origination. Then the next passage, the mind contaminated by greed is not free. Ragupakilitang, so contaminated by greed or defiled by greed. So this is the past participle of the word kilesa, and the upakilesa, of course we looked at the upakilesa sutta the other day. So ragupakilitang va bhikkhave cittang navimucchati. The mind contaminated by greed is not free. And wisdom contaminated by ignorance does not grow. Yeah? So the freedom of the mind, in this way, freedom of the mind or freedom of the heart comes from the fading away of greed. Right? So the ceta vimutti is the freedom of heart, and freedom by wisdom comes from the fading away of ignorance. So freedom, but notice we have these two phrases, ceta vimutti and panya vimutti. Freedom of heart and freedom by wisdom. So again, each of these have a role to play in these. Now these two things, Ceta Vimutti and Panya Vimutti, are both aspects of enlightenment, and they're descriptions of an arahant. So an arahant is one who's Ceta Vimutti and Panya Vimutti. Actually, it's a somewhat complex topic in the suttas. Ceta Vimutti also sometimes refers to just a state of samadhi, so there's that. Sometimes Ceta Vimutti and Panya Vimutti are aspects of arahantship, so any arahant has those two aspects of freedom, and obviously that must be true, right? Obviously an arahant is free, their heart is free, and obviously their wisdom is free. But also it's used as a way to distinguish different kinds of arahants. So some arahants are described as being Ceta Vimutti arahants and some Panya Vimutti. And when that's done by way of emphasis. So those arahants who emphasize samadhi or emphasize samatha in their practice would be described as Ceta Vimutti arahants. And those arahants who emphasize vipassana would be described as the Panya Vimutti. Like say Anuruddha might be a Ceta Vimutti arahant, and say Sariputta might be a Panya Vimutti arahant. But obviously that doesn't mean that it excludes the other side, right? It's just about the emphasis. So this sutta is very, very characteristic, very fundamental to the way that samatha and vipassana are treated throughout all of the suttas. Everywhere we find samatha and vipassana, we always find the emphasis is on the integration, right? Integration. That these two things help each other, that they are both things that should be developed, and they're both things that play a part in realization, vidya bhagya. So in modern times we often find the idea that there are two kind of different things and that are kind of in competition. And sometimes you find people who say, oh, don't do samatha because, blah, 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 you'll get attached to jhanas, blah, 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 and so on. To which the response would be, I wish. And it's like attachment to jhanas is like the biggest red herring in modern Buddhist meditation. It's like... Anyway, so what's the benefit of samatha is to... And once you divide it up. Now, one of the roots of this problem is that in the Theravada tradition, there came to be a practice where we could divide the different meditations up and say some of these are samatha meditations and some of these are vipassana meditations. All right? The suttas don't do that. Okay? So there's nowhere in the suttas that says that metta is a samatha meditation and contemplation of impermanency is a vipassana meditation. It doesn't think like that, right? Samatha and vipassana are qualities of the mind which are to be developed and which work together to support each other in the Eightfold Path. Now, it's true that certain kinds of meditations will emphasize certain of those qualities. Absolutely, right? If we are practicing metta meditation, then we are emphasizing those qualities of tranquility, qualities of oneness, qualities of bliss, which are all on that side of samatha. But it's also not completely separated from vipassana, because also when we do metta meditation, we start to erode the difference between self and other. Right? And so this is kind of leading us also towards vipassana. Similarly with anapanasati, right? Watch the breath, calm down the mind, tranquilize the body. All of these are processes on the side of samatha. But also we're told to see impermanence in the breath. We're told to become dispassionate and to investigate the breath as well. So it has that aspect of vipassana as well. So out through the suttas, there's not like a clear dividing line. And most of the meditations will have those aspects as well, right? Or those two aspects of samatha and vipassana. So again, it's kind of not wrong in a way to say, well, these are samatha meditations and these are vipassana meditations, but you just don't want to insist on it too much. That's all. It's not that it's actually wrong to do that. I mean, it helps to clarify, right, that these kinds of, if you want to develop samatha, these kinds of meditations are helpful for you to do that, right? Actually, that's handy, that's useful. But then it becomes, we have a habit in humanity of taking the categories which are there to help us and then we use them to make a prison for ourselves with them instead. Yeah? And we lock people up if they're in the wrong category. Yeah? So, so you know, to understand things in that way is fine, but don't get too head up and don't get too caught up about it. And I don't know if maybe this has quietened down in recent years, but I know that when I was in Malaysia, you know, it was quite the thing, especially in the 90s. And my friend and mentor, Venerable Dhamma Woodho, was one of the first monks to teach Samatha meditation in Malaysia. He was teaching based on the suttas, and he got in quite a lot of trouble, and it was really kind of controversial. And some of the monks were like really kind of upset, both on his side and against him. And you know, you'd have like basically some Dhamma centers when there's like these signs up saying like no Samatha meditators here, you know, this kind of thing. And other centers might be a bit less aggressive, but they'd have like the Dhammapada passage, there's no wisdom without jhana, no jhana without wisdom, and then they'd put that like a really big sign, and they put that in their meditation hall just to make sure that everybody knows, you know. I met one monk at that time who he'd ordained as a Malaysian monk, lovely guy actually, really got on well with him. He was a Malaysian monk who's an older monk when I met him, just living in a little kuti off somewhere, very, very humble, very good-natured, very kind of bright-minded monk. And he'd originally ordained in the Burmese tradition, the Mahasi tradition or the Ujjanika tradition or something, and gone to Burma to practice and do all this vipassana meditation. And then he started reading the suttas. And he said he got so angry when he started reading the suttas, he couldn't believe it, because he'd been told all of these things about jhanas and samatha and so on, and then he looked in the suttas and none of it was true. And he looked, everyone's been misleading me, and he got really annoyed with his teachers and his whole movement and just left in a storm and went to practice by himself in Malaysia. I met him many years later after that. And so, you know, there are some strong feelings about it. And so it was around that time after I went to Woodho in Malaysia, I came internationally, and then Ajahn Brahm, and around the same time Paok Sayadaw in Malaysia, and others started to teach Samatha meditation more prominently. That kind of rehabilitated it. And I think that the international meditation scene, I think, is a bit more mature and a bit more balanced these days. And I don't know if we find still that same heated attachment to one's meditation methods. There was a famous, if you're interested, there was a famous dialogue in the 1960s between Sri Lankan monks and Burmese monks on the topic of Samatha and Vipassana, combined into a whole thick book full of all these very detailed scholarly arguments. And it was some of the monks, I think Venerable Kaminda and some others at the Vajirarama, and then some of the monks in the Mahasi technique, and they were writing these really kind of long rebuttals of each other's meditation methods and things like that. So definitely worth read if you're interested in that kind of thing. So it was really kind of controversial. And when you look at it from the point of view of the suttas, this is why, when you look at it from the point of view of the suttas, actually you don't find that there. You know, that's all something that came from that process of how the ideas of these things evolved in the Theravada tradition specifically. In the suttas, the emphasis again and again and again is that these things are there to help and support each other. And the whole purpose of the teaching on Samatha Vipassana is to help us understand the harmony and balance between these different aspects of meditation. That's why the Buddha is teaching us. Yeah? Okay. So Samatha is good, Vipassana is good, arguing about it, not good. If you think your meditation is the best one, great! Go and do your meditation, get enlightened, you know? And we are there to help you. If you decide that you want to try and practice a different way, we'll be there to help you, that's all. No need to argue about it. All right, so this is Venerable Ananda speaking, talking about all those bhikkhus and bhikkhunis who declare in his presence. And notice, of course, Ananda using inclusive language here. Good on him, right? acknowledging the bhikkhunis. It's worth noting that there's a number of passages in the suttas where the Buddha is addressing bhikkhus or mendicants, but it's clear that there are bhikkhunis present. Or passages where in the Pali it just says bhikkhus, but in the Chinese parallels it says bhikkhunis and bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. So for example, in the Sarvastivadin version of the Satipatthana Sutta, the Pali just says bhikkhus and the Chinese says bhikkhu and bhikkhunis. So for that reason it seems clear that the word bhikkhus as a term of address is just a convention, and it isn't meant to mean that only bhikkhus were present. So this is one of the reasons why I usually translate bhikkhu as mendicant, because then it's a gender neutral term, so it can include both bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. But where you have both of them together, then I use monks and nuns. Okay, so one or other 4 paths. So they've attained arahantship, perfection. Okay, take a mendicant who develops serenity before discernment. Samatha pubbangamang vipassana. All right? So this is kind of more or less the normal way that it's taught in the suttas, right? Sila, Samadhi, Panya, yeah? And this, so many times, again and again and again, this is the normal path that people are taught to practice in so many different contexts. Huh? So when you're developing samatha first, then vipassana, and it obviously doesn't mean necessarily like 100% samatha and then 100% vipassana, but generally speaking, you're developing your samatha primarily. As you do so, the path is born in you. Maggo sanjayati. They cultivate, develop, and make much of it. By doing so, they give up the fetters and eliminate the underlying tendencies. And so, again, notice the connection of the language with what we heard in the previous sutta, that samatha and vipassana are developed, right? Same thing, same idea. So to be developed. And as they do so, the path, the maggo, yeah? Obviously meaning the eightfold path, is born in them. So that when it says maggo sanjayati, the birth of the path, then this refers to the entry onto the path, and then you develop it and make more of it, and then as you do so, you abandon the fetters, becoming or get rid of the asavas, thus becoming an arahant. And again, notice that purpose as the same as the previous sutta we looked at, it's specified to abandon raga and avidya. So the same thing is being said here, that the purpose of doing things is to abandon these defilements. Okay, so now the next one. So here we get one which is a little bit more unusual. Someone develops discernment before serenity. As they do so, the path is born in them. They cultivate, develop, and make much of it. By doing so, they give up the fetters and eliminate the underlying tendencies. So the point here is that you can develop samatha before vipassana or vipassana before samatha, and it doesn't really matter because the outcome is still the same. Yeah? So we do find in a number of cases where that wisdom factors are taught before the samadhi factors. Can anybody give me an example of one of the teachings in the suttas where we find the wisdom factors taught before the samadhi factors? Samadhi Sutta, I'm just trying to think. Is that right? Maybe. Maybe, let's have a look. Okay, so it has right view, good, understands the root is skillful, and then they're giving up ignorance and knowledge, right view. So it's defining someone who has right view. So I'm trying to look for a place where it says, so yes, you're right, it does start with the teaching on wisdom, so we got that right view at the beginning, and I'm just trying to look for whether it then talks about developing samadhi as a result of that. And I can't see that. I'm not sure that I mean, obviously that could be implicit, but I'm looking for a place where it explicitly talks about that. I mean, one example would be, say, in the 7 Bodhangas, where it begins with sati and Dhamma Vichaya. So the Dhamma Vichaya is like the wisdom faculty where you're investigating the Dhammas, and then the Samatha flows after that. Yeah? So this is a sort of perhaps the most straightforward canonical example, but there's a number of suttas that have those cases too. Right. Yeah. I'm not sure if I have those here actually. There's actually, the commentary gives a number of examples of this. I'll see if I can just find it quickly. Someone should tell the VRI people to update their HTTPS certification. Anyway. Okay, so what are we now? We're at 4.170. Pretty sure in the commentary to this, it gives some examples. So anyway, while you're looking at this, you can see this is how you look up something in the commentaries. If you ever want to know how to do that, yay! You always wanted to do that. So you go to tipitaka.org/Roman, and there you have the Tipitaka, and the Atthikatas, the commentaries, the Tika, sub-commentaries, Anya, other stuff. Okay? So Visuddhimagga, Sanghayana Pucca. So this is a discussion about the councils, Ledi Sayadaw, Gantha, so it's a collection of Ledi Sayadaw's writings. Buddha Vandana Gatha, so a collection of verses in praise of the Buddha. Collection of Wangsas, histories. Collection of Vyakarana Gantha, a collection of grammatical books. Various things. What's in Sihala Gantha? These are a collection of Sinhalese books. Tupa Wangsa, Data Wangsa, and so on. It's a lot of stuff here on Tipitaka, miscellaneous. A lot of things here on tipitaka.org. I don't know what all of those books are, but anyway. Mainly interested here in the commentaries, and you can open up Sutta Vinaya and Abhidhamma, and then you can open up to the Nikayas, open up then Gudra Nikaya, and then look under the 4. So you have to. It's good to know the chapter name. The Vagga name is the Patipada Vagga. And where are we now? Probably search for this. Oh, here we go, maybe this one. Oh yeah, this is Yuganaga Sutta. So here's the commentary for the sutta that we're looking at. 10th is a Samatha Bapu Bangama, and it gives those things, and I'm just trying to think if it gives examples. Vipassanang Pubangamang, preceded by Vipassana, previous practice, having done previous practice of Vipassana, one develops Samatha, Pakatiya, Vipassana Labhi, Vipassana Tattva Samadhi, Upadeta Bo. So normally by somebody who's gained Vipassana, then by being grounded upon that, then they can give rise to Samadhi. This is what that means. Looks like I was mistaken. I thought that this commentary gave a number of examples in the suttas of these different cases, but it looks like that it doesn't. So my apologies. Sorry? Tipitaka.org. Oh, that's VRI. That's the Goenka. Yeah, that's the Goenka mob in India at. Yes. The Atthikata is what we call the commentary. Yeah. Tika is what we call the sub-commentaries. Anya is other. Atua. Atua in Sinhala? Yeah, Atua. Anya is other. Various miscellaneous things. Yeah. Sorry? Tipani. Tipani, maybe from Dipani. Dipani means, this is another word for a commentary actually. The thing is, in Pali and Sanskrit, there are lots and lots and lots of words for commentaries, actually. Indians, Sanskrit people, Pali people love commentaries. And there are commentaries upon commentaries upon commentaries, and so there are many, many words for them. Only partial collections. So we are trying to work on a project to translate all of them, but we will see how that goes. Yeah, so far, so various ones have been translated into English. The major ones that have been translated into English are done by Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's done the Sutta Nipata, and then there are some others in the Pali Text Society, but actually usually only the minor ones, because they're kind of smaller and a bit more manageable. And the major commentaries have not yet been translated into English. They have been translated into Thai and Sinhala. I think Sinhala? You have Sinhalese translations of commentaries? Not sure. Not sure. That's some, but all of them? Not sure. Anyway, so yeah, big project. One of the problems with translating the commentaries is that they're a really mixed bunch of material, and a lot of the things in the commentaries are quite useful and quite interesting, but then there are a lot of stuff which is very technical or which doesn't really make sense in a translation, because it's just like explaining what the words are, or giving a grammatical variation of the word, or giving a paraphrase or something like that, which is useful if you're learning Pali and you're sort of looking for the synonyms and trying to figure out exactly how to pass out a word. So it's really useful for translators and things, but it's not actually that helpful to read it in translation. Yeah, so this is one of the kind of the drawbacks of translating commentaries. So, well, the commentaries were mostly edited and put together by Buddhaghosa within in the 400s, right? So he did the main commentaries for most of the texts. Now they were built on or derived from the pre-existing commentaries, which were compiled in Sri Lanka from about, very roughly, from the time when Reverend Mahinda arrived. So you've got to think, like, commentaries originally were oral literature, okay? So as soon as the monks arrived, when Mahinda arrived and Sanghamitta arrived, they had commentaries in their heads. They knew, and so that's the beginning of the commentaries in Sri Lanka. And then they become formalized, they become written down, and so over a period up till about 1st century AD, roughly, so that's maybe like a 300-year period that the commentaries were compiled or put together in Sri Lanka. From there, they were mostly left. Okay, so for like 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries, there are very few additions to the commentaries. Okay, so we know this by looking at by scholars who've researched this, have looked at the names. The commentaries frequently mention names of monks and events and things that happened at the time. And they can be compared with the Mahavamsa, which gives us a historical material. So we're actually able to date that material with a fair degree of confidence. And so most of the time, there's basically no references to any events that happened during that period, so say 2nd, 3rd, 4th century. These are very rough dates, but around that period. So mostly the commentaries are compiled and then just left for that period. And then when Buddhaghosa arrived in the 5th century, then he took upon himself the task of translating, because the commentaries were in Old Sinhala, okay? Which meant you had a twofold problem. Number one is that Sinhala had changed. So it's now 700 years from when they were first put together. Yeah, 600 or 700 years. So the Sinhalese language had evolved and changed, so that if you were trying to study Buddhism, you had to learn Pali to read the suttas, and you had to learn Old Sinhala to read the commentaries. So that's getting more and more complicated, but also because Buddhism at that time was becoming more international. Right? We know that this is where the trade links with China were starting up. We know that Vipassana came through Sri Lanka and various kinds of things. The Bhikkhunis went to China, and the trade links were becoming more international. So rather than having sort of two localized dialects to put the texts in, and Buddhaghosa, who of course came from India, right? So he would have faced these problems. Then he translated the old commentary from the old Sinhala into Pali, and he edited and compiled it. And so from that time, then those commentaries have been used. Now he did most of the work. The few texts that he didn't do commentaries for were done by another monk called Dhammapala, who worked about a century after Buddhaghosa. And so he basically finished off the commentaries for the main Nikayas, main suttas and Vinaya and Abhidhamma. And then after that, they were fixed, and the tradition then added sub-commentaries to most of those works as well. Okay? So this is the commentarial tradition. So here you can see the Vinaya, lots of Vinaya sub-commentaries. Oh my goodness. Vinaya Sangaha Attakata, Vajira Buddhitika, Vimati Vinodnitika, Vinaya Alankara Tika, Kankavitarani Purana Tika. Oh, Vinaya Vinichaya, Uttara Vinichaya. No, these are the commentaries on the Vinaya. The sub-commentaries on the Vinaya commentary. These are the commentaries on the commentary.
So the Vinaya is in the
No, the Vinaya is in the suttas. Right, Tipitaka? Huh? So Vinaya is not in the suttas. The Vinaya is in the Tipitaka. Right? Vinaya Vinicaya, Uttara Vinicaya means decisions on Vinaya, further decisions. Yes, in many cases, yeah. So discussion of different points, you know. They can get pretty complicated, convoluted. I mean, they've become very legalistic, a lot of these discussions. I'm not familiar with all of that literature.
You often find that many monastics or Buddhist practitioners, they sometimes focus more on the commentaries than the suttas themselves.
Sure. Oh, absolutely, yeah. Sorry, Ravi?
Also, I feel that there's a lot of focus now in Sri Lanka on these Abhidhamma studies rather than the be familiar with Tripitaka.
Okay.
So but they are not.
And the suttas, yeah. No, I understand, yeah.
Sorry, Abhidhamma is
So,
later than the Sutta.
That's correct, yeah.
and
Pitaka?
so they say that that's something the Buddha taught the celestials.
That's right, yeah.
Is there anything like that in early Buddhism?
No. So, I mean, always these things to me are the things that, to me, the tradition, the Abhidhamma commentaries and so on, these are the discussions among the tradition about what the meaning of the suttas is. And if you have a good grounding in what the suttas is teaching, then you can understand those things and, maybe it's beneficial or, you can learn from them, that's up to you. But when you start to get unmoored from what the Buddha was saying in the suttas, then that starts to become a problem because you're not sort of realizing what the context is that's giving those a lot of meaning. Yeah. Yeah. It depends where you are. Yeah, different traditions are very different. In the forest tradition, no. See, in the forest tradition, it's different. Forest tradition is mainly on the teachings of the Ajahns. Actually, most people don't read the suttas, they don't read the commentaries, they don't read the Abhidhamma, they just listen to what the Ajahns say. Yeah? And not everybody, obviously, but generally speaking, that's the tendency. But then that's not uniform. If you go to, say, Ajahn Buddhadasa's monastery, Wat Suamok, then he emphasizes studying suttas there, as well as meditation. And there are new reform movements as well, where there's more emphasis on suttas as well. And it's not to say that within the forest tradition that they never teach the suttas, because they do. And there'd be like one of the Wapapong monasteries that was really popular actually with the young monks when I was there. I can't remember the name of the Ajahn, but he was a really good Ajahn, and every rains retreat he would teach the first 3 suttas, Dhammacakka, Nattalakkhana, Adita Parayaya Sutta. And so it's not like these things were sort of never taught, but they weren't emphasized in that same way. In the Thai, I don't know too much about the Sri Lankan education system, but in the Thai education system, if you go up to the 9th level of the Pariyatti, which is equivalent to a PhD level, there's no study of the suttas at all in those 9 years of study. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, because they're too holy. Sorry? Right? Right? Yeah. Sure. And a lot of Abhidhamma is very practical, so a lot of it is about how do we map different terms and ideas from different parts of the suttas on each other, and how do these bits relate to those bits, and these kinds of things, yeah. Well, good question, because technically, if you talk about the Abhidhamma Pitaka, then of course that's in the Tipitaka itself, right? That's these books. But when people talk about Abhidhamma generally, usually what they mean is the Abhidhamma tradition, which typically means the Visuddhimagga, but actually mostly in Theravada, it mostly means the Abhidhammatta Sangaha, which was a book written in the 11th century in Burma. There you go, I'm just going to see if that's here. Should be. Abhidhammatta Sangaho. Yeah, so this one, the Abhidhammatta Sangaho, this is the primary text that's used in Theravada for the study of Abhidhamma. And most of the later Abhidhamma books and so on are essentially then commentaries on this book. And this kind of summarizes the Abhidhamma system in the Theravada tradition. Do I look worried to you? Which you mean, which ajahns? Right. Usually not, yeah. I mean, look, people might have a general knowledge of things, and it just depends on the individual. Some people do, some don't. But generally speaking, no, it's not really emphasized very much. There actually has a long history in Thailand that when research has been done on Dhamma education in Thailand, how traditional Dhamma education actually happened in monasteries and in the regions of Thailand, the main way that Dhamma education was passed down was through these little handwritten handbooks, which were basically like a curriculum or a summary of Dhamma, which would be written by one of the teachers at that institution, that monastery or whatever. And so they'd write up this handbook, which would be then the basis of the course that they would teach their students, and largely then their students would copy it down. Yeah, students would copy down these little handbooks, and then that tradition that would be passed down within that monastery or wherever that was. And so that was actually the primary means of Dhamma education traditionally in Thailand. In modern times, then when following on from King Mongkut and the reforms of the Buddhism in the late 19th, early 20th century, they then established a sort of central authority to govern Buddhism, which doesn't do a whole lot of governing, thank goodness. But one of the things that they did do was establish a national curriculum for Buddhist studies. And the monks are supposed to study that, at least to do a few years. So you're kind of expected to do like 3 years of a pariyatti course, at which time you have the prefix Maha. So like my teacher, Ajahn Maha Chachai, so this is what the Maha means. The Maha means he's completed those 3 years of study, which is essentially equivalent to a bachelor's level. So that's not really sort of enforced. That's kind of supposed to be a requirement. Most of the forest monks don't do that. Some forest monks do, and they'll do that study process and do the exams and get the qualification and so on. But most forest monks don't, which kind of annoys the city monks, because they're like, oh, all these forest monks, they're really kind of well known and they're getting all of these donations and they're building all of these nice kutis and stuff. But they don't even know, they haven't even passed their exams. How do we know what they're doing? Or do they understand Dhamma at all? Yeah? No. Again, this is the first 3 years of the 9-year program. So that 9-year program, there's no study of suttas. So I mean, there's study of things that are from the suttas, obviously, but you're not actually reading the suttas directly. Yeah. That curriculum. The curriculum was put together by the Crown Prince of Thailand in the early 20th century. And what was his name? Vajirawood? I can't even remember his name now. That's bad. And so he was he was actually quite an amazing scholar who was sort of one of the heirs of King Mongkut, and he was the sort of leader of the Thai Sangha for a period of time in the 20th century. I'll see if I can find details on his life. Thai Sangharaja probably has Sangharaja in Thailand, Sankharat. So the ancient history, blah blah blah, since the 1900s. No. So this is his list of supreme patriarchs. Where are we now? 1816, 1820, 1843. This gentleman here, Vajranyana Varorosa. Vajranyana Varorasa. Prince Manusya Gamanop Manusanago. So he was one of the sort of most sort of practically influential people in the founding of modern Thai Buddhism, and he did a number of kind of quite remarkable things, regarded as the leading intellectual of his generation in Siam, and like some of the even like Pali chants that we do were composed by him. Then he went on to form a lot of the books that are still studied. He wrote a lot of the books that are still studied in Thai Buddhism, like the Vinaya and the Dhamma curriculum. And see, the thing is that he actually did a pretty good job, and those books are actually pretty good. The way that he wrote was also very nice, actually. Like if you look in the Vinaya he'll write about a controversial point in the Vinaya and say some people say this and some people say that, and then he'll just say, well, we'll just have to let the Vinaya experts decide this one. And you're like, who's the Vinaya expert if not the guy who's writing the book on the Vinaya? So he himself had this kind of quite nice, quite humble sort of approach to his scholarship and what he was doing, and he did quite a good job of doing that. Unfortunately, of course, it's also 100 years old now. You know, I mean, you can imagine going to school and studying textbooks that are 100 years old. Yeah, I mean, we've learnt a bit about education and so on since then. And so there are talks that come up regularly in Thailand among the monks to say, okay, we need to replace these books and update them. But they were by the Crown Prince, so we can't really criticize them. And so it's easier to just teach them again next year. So this is kind of a mixed legacy that they have. Right? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Right. Okay. 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 Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's a similar thing, but I don't really know much about the Sinhalese system in terms of like where the books come from and how it's tested and those things. Yeah. Yeah. But he said he was very interesting in the way that he went about things, because he was a very genuine scholar who had this really kind of inquiring mind when he went about these things. I actually just referred to his one of his arguments in an article that I wrote a few months ago on the so-called Aniyata rules in Pali. So you have these rules which are called undetermined. And these are two rules about what to do if a laywoman makes an accusation of sexual harassment against a monk. All right? And basically these say that if the laywoman makes an accusation of sexual harassment, then that should be brought up to the Sangha, it should be investigated, and the Sangha should treat the monk as according to the offence that he's committed. Whether it's a serious or a light offence. That's why they're called undetermined, because the nature of the offence is undetermined until the outcome is fixed. But what's interesting about that rule, or one of the interesting things about it, is that it doesn't just... one of the things that it clearly does is it clearly says that the Sangha has an obligation to take these accusations seriously and to investigate them properly, right? Not to make an excuse about it, not to pretend that it doesn't happen, and not to just dismiss the word of the laywoman who is making the accusation. They must take it seriously, they must investigate, and they must treat the monk in accordance with that. This much is clear. But what is slightly less clear and is somewhat debated is that if you look closely at the wording of it, it actually says that the monk should be treated according to the accusation made by the laywoman. Right? Normally in the Vinaya, a procedure is only done by the confession of the person involved. So if you don't confess, then there's no procedure. Right? Now there are exceptions to that in certain cases, that you can be expelled or something like that, but generally speaking, you have to confess to an offence. But in this case, it seems to be an exception. Seems to be the case that if a trustworthy laywoman brings an accusation, that the monk can be required to carry out that offence even if they don't confess to it. Yeah? Which is interesting, right? And it certainly concurs with modern findings, which is that the vast majority of cases when accusations of sexual harassment are made, that they are in fact true. Right? Obviously, that's not every single case, but in the vast majority of cases, it's true. And I did a bit of research into this when I was doing it, and I found that the best research seems to say that 3% of sexual harassment allegations are untrue. Yeah, 3%. So 97% are true, which I compared with, say, the rate of accurate murder convictions in the United States, which is about 5 to 7% are untrue. Right? So the accusation of a single laywoman of sexual harassment is more certain than a murder conviction. And if there are two or more, then it makes it virtually impossible statistically. Anyway. Yes. Yes. Well, sure, yeah. Yeah, you have to assume a sort of goodwill. Yeah, Radha.
So what about against
Right. So this rule is another interesting detail about this rule is that it doesn't have any counterpart in the Bhikkhuni Vinaya. Sorry? You don't have the two Aniyata rules, yeah. So, I mean, you can assume by principle that it would also apply, right? But, the reality is that most sexual harassment is by men to women, yeah? So that is why that rule applies there. So it's really interesting that that rule is there. that it was explicitly made by the Buddha to protect women from sexual harassment and to make sure that their complaints were listened to and were taken seriously. Now, this question about whether the monk should actually be required to undergo the penance even without a confession, it's a somewhat controversial point, because on the one hand you've got a general principle of Dhamma which says that they should confess, and on the other hand you've got the specific wording of the rule which doesn't seem to allow for that. And so there is some discussion in the commentaries on this point, but this monk, Venerable Vajrayana, discussed it in his Vinayamukha, and he said actually the wording of the rule is clear and that it does not require a confession. So the accusation of a woman by herself should be enough to ensure that the monk carry out that procedure. So this I thought was really interesting, because he is like literally the supreme patriarch. I mean, it doesn't get much more patriarchal than that, right? And he's in that position of power, and he's in a Thai culture, which, like everybody says, Thai culture is, they don't listen to women and these kinds of things. But actually, it's more complicated than that. And one of the reasons I got into this, because Venerable Thanissaro's interpretation of the ruling, he took the other stance. He said that, no, you can't believe the woman, that you have to have the confession from the monk, right? And so our perception that there's an American guy who's living in California is going to be more apt to listening to women than a Thai Sangha patriarch actually is not true. Yeah? It depends. They're complicated. Yes, Deepika, sorry. Right. There's something. Right, exactly. It's not just a random person. That's correct. That's correct, yeah. So, that would be like somebody who you know from the monastery, someone who you're familiar with, somebody you have some trust with. That's correct. It's not just a random accusation. And there certainly are cases where people who have mental illness issues who make these kinds of accusations. And I think most senior monks have had this at one time or another. Unfortunately, and not just senior monks, but actually anyone in a public position is going to end up with that kind of thing happening. Just so you know, anyone who's taking interest in Dhamma teaching or anything like that, it's going to happen. Congratulations. Because people see you and they fixate you. And a lot of the people who come to listen to Dhamma are people who are in need of help. Right? And they are not always mentally well balanced and so on. And they're looking for an authority figure, and they become hyper-fixated, over-fixated on the teacher. And so it's really important to acknowledge that and to try to find healthy ways to kind of dispel that fixation and to help people to find healing, but without getting caught up in the fantasies and accusations that people can have. Yeah. Ling.
It's actually really curious what happened to that past efforts in Bangladesh in that Thai monastery?
The monk, the vegetarian monk. Yes. Pramana. Yantra.
Yeah.
Are you asking about Yantra? What happened to him? Yeah. What's the question?
What happened to him? There was an accusation saying that he was actually,
Yeah, he was traveling around the world having a jolly old time. Yeah, sure, go on. Yes, of course it was all true. Yeah, he was the ladies of the night down in King's Cross called him the vampire because he didn't take his robe off when he did the deed. Yes. So this was Yantra, who was a very well-known meditation teacher. He was like the pop star monk when I first arrived in Thailand, early 90s. Incredibly successful, the most famous, well-known, movie star good looks. Combine movie star good looks with the with like the sort of Deepak Chopra kind of pop Buddhism teachings and various kinds of stories of psychic powers and stuff like that, and you've got a combustible recipe for international fame, which unfortunately seems to have gone to his head. Yeah, and he went round having his jolly old time with ladies on multiple continents. Actually, it was Elizabeth Gorski who was one of the first people who spoke up about that. Yeah, now I Nirodha, and so she was one of the people who really first raised it as an issue. But yeah, no, it's all true. Anyway, he got busted by the Thai Sangha. It was very big news at the time, got disrobed. He put on a green robe for a while, and then he got sent to California. Well, he went to California. I mean, they don't care. So he stayed there for a while, and eventually he went to jail for, or got criminal offence for killing someone, and for driving without a license. And they had an accident, someone died. So, yeah. It was all pretty bad.
I heard that he came back to Australia and he stayed at
Maybe, yeah, I don't know. I know he has still kind of been around, but I mean it's been many years now. Yeah, but most of the time he's been living quietly in California since then. I haven't really heard much from him. I assume he's still in California. Yeah. Okay, so we've got a little bit off topic here. Little bit. I'm just wondering whether to continue with this. Look, what I'll do is I'll briefly continue with this so we can wrap this up this morning. Okay. All right. So then the next one. So we've done Samatha first and then Vipassana. We've done Vipassana first, then Samatha, and then we have the developed Samatha and Vipassana in conjunction. Punaparang Samatha Vipassanang Yuganadhang Bhaveti. So developing both in balance and conjunction. An example of that might be even the sutta we looked at yesterday, the Mahahatipadopama Sutta, where you saw like that kind of integration that Sariputta was teaching, contemplation of not self, and then using the metta meditation to overcome the anger and so on. And so it's all kind of like part of that integrated path. So this is a kind of doing it more in balance and integrated. So this is the Samatha Vipassana Yuganadha. Right. And then finally, the last one appears to be slightly, a bit of a bit different than the first three. A mendicant's mind is seized by restlessness to realize the teaching. So this is Dhammudhacha Vigahitang Manasang Hoti. Manasang meaning the mind. Vigahita is like seized, right? Gahita to be grabbed. Vigahita, grabbed hard or seized. And then, so the interesting phrase here is the Dhammudhacha. And the meaning of this is this is a unique phrase in this particular context. The meaning is a little bit open to interpretation, but I think that the Uddhacha here has the same meaning as Uddhacha does in the 10 fetters. Okay, the Uddhacha, which is some of the higher of the 10 fetters. And in that context, Uddhacha essentially means that you're you're in a rush to get enlightened. Okay, so this is not the kind of coarse Uddhacha that means like I'm not going to sit here. I can only sit for 5 minutes and then I'm checking my watch. Okay, it's not that, right? It's that you're practicing meditation and the mind is like pushing a little bit too hard. Like we saw in the Upakilesa Sutta, too overly eager to realize the Dhamma and become enlightened, and the mind is still not completely balanced with the development of samadhi. So this persists even in the anagami, right? Even the non-returner still has this. So even their mind is very highly developed and they've let go a lot of the fetters, but they can still be just pushing a bit hard, a bit too much in a rush to make it all the way. And so in that case, then the response to that is to then further develop samadhi, right? To keep on coming back, keep developing samadhi and unifying that, and then the path is born. See, See, this is Venerable Ananda teaching, right? And it begins, Venerable Ananda was staying near Kosambi in Gahosita's monastery. No mention of the Buddha. Okay, so when there's no mention of the Buddha in the sutta, often it's a sign that this is after the Parinibbana. Yeah? And we also know that Ananda only became an arahant in the first council. So why are these other monks coming and talking to him about arahantship if he's a stream enterer? Seems a bit unlikely. More likely, also, why would monks be coming and talking to him about arahantship instead of going to the Buddha? Yeah? So most likely this is given sometime after the Parinibbana. Yeah? And so I wonder whether this Dhammuddhacha is even Ananda talking about himself. Because that was what he was like before the first council. Yeah? He was like, oh, I've got to get enlightened before the first council, I've got to hurry up. Yeah? And yeah, so maybe this is a slight autobiographical hint in this particular sutta. Maybe that, and that could even explain why there's a slight asymmetry in the thing, you know. I'm hoping that the teachings that we've learnt over this course have helped to reinforce your Dhamma knowledge, the things that you've already known, to maybe challenge some of your ideas, give you some new perspectives, and perhaps to inspire you to look deeper in terms of your practice, and to find the reality of the things that the Buddha was talking about. We have one final sutta on the curriculum, and I must say, just as the composer of the curriculum, I'm quite impressed with the fact that we managed to read through all of the suttas on there. So whoever chose all the suttas did a good job. Hey, that was me. Oh, good. Okay, good. So that was nice. You never know how these things will work out, right? So anyway, so I'm quite happy with the way we've been able to cover most of the material that we talked about on the course. We did change a few things along the way after the first few group exercises, and we decided that was enough and focused more on meditation, so I think that was good. And I hope that we've been able to, having the more meditation time gives us more space to really internalize and deepen our understanding. And I'll be honest, I can't really understand how they do schools and universities and stuff where you're just doing hours of teaching every day and you're not actually doing anything to absorb it. But anyway. All right, so we have one more sutta to discuss, the Nandaka Sutta. All right, so here we have another discourse on Samatha and Vipassana, and of course framed within very nice, as a sort of a fairly small narrative framing, but still a nice one, right? And Nandika, on the one hand, a bit embarrassed that he made the Buddha stand out there with a sore back, ouch. But also the Buddha very careful to encourage him because actually he was doing something good. And Nandika was the same one who gave the exhortation to the bhikkhunis in the Majjhima Nikaya, right? I think in the the one where he was like, oh, let's give the discourse to the bhikkhunis, and then they were like, oh, not him again. He gives really boring talks. You remember that one? So they used to assign a monk to go and do the teachings for the bhikkhunis, and then they told, I think it was Nandika, pretty sure, and all the nuns were like, oh, not him again. He's the same boring teaching again and again every time. And so then when he heard that, he's like, okay, I'll show them. So he flew up in the air and gave the discourse while standing in the air, and then sort of blew up into flames and poured fire out of him and did all of these kinds of things. And the nuns were like, wow, that was a really effective teaching today. Yeah, that was great. So, anyway. So, And yeah, again, what can I say? I just love these. I love these little interactions with the Buddha that are just so very kind of human and very humble. And there is the Buddha just standing patiently outside, and then just and comes in when when there's a time to come in. And the Buddha, of course, always encouraging people to share the Dhamma, to teach the Dhamma. And, it's one of the things in Buddhism, I mean, the Anguttara Nikaya, it talks about this to a number of times, and talks about what the criteria are for somebody who's going to be teaching Dhamma, for sharing Dhamma. And sometimes people are reluctant to do that. Sometimes Buddhists feel like, I don't know enough, I'm not enlightened, and what can I do? And so sometimes I think we compare ourselves to the Buddha, or compare ourselves to the great teachers in the tradition, and we think, I can't ever do what they do. But maybe what I might suggest is instead you should compare yourself to all of the other people in the world who are wandering lost, and for whom maybe just one or two simple words of the Dhamma might mean something very powerful to them. And sometimes that, because you're not teaching for the Buddha, and you're not teaching for all the great masters or anything like that, you're teaching for the people who need the Dhamma. And you know how many of them there are? A lot. Yeah, a lot. Wherever you go, whatever part of society you're in, whatever country you're in, whatever context you're in, there are a lot of people who are suffering. And we don't know, because people are usually pretty good at hiding it. Pretty good at getting on with our lives and pretending that everything's A-okay. And, you're just doing your shopping. Just vacuuming the carpet, or just, talking to a friend, and everything's fine. And you say, how's it going? They say, fine. And it's not always fine. Yeah, it's not. And we can't solve everything, of course, right? But as Dhamma practitioners, we have learnt something. We have learnt something. And at the very least, we have learnt the most fundamental teaching of the Buddha, the most fundamental empowering teaching of the Four Noble Truths, which is that the key to understanding suffering is inside ourselves. So whoever we meet, whatever situation that they are in, whatever context they're in, every single person that we meet is suffering. All of them. Every single one. And they're all suffering because of their own craving and attachment. And they can all find peace by learning to let go. Every single person you see, everyone walking down the street, everyone on the roads, everyone around you, everyone in your family, everyone in your class or at your work, everyone you meet is all capable of finding peace by letting go. So sometimes what's needed is not some great master or some kind of enlightened being or some kind of good scholar or whatever. Because sometimes that's even too distant for people. Actually, they're not ready to hear that, and that's not what they need. Sometimes they just need somebody close to them, somebody who's nearby who can say something, even a word or two. So I want you to just to think about this, like when you're leaving this retreat, and just to be remembering that there are things that you can do that will help to bring Dhamma for others. And I know that there are many people here who are already doing that in their own way. And so I want to encourage that. And for other people, it depends. Maybe, it doesn't have to be right now. It doesn't, I'm not saying you all have to go and do the same thing. I'm just saying to bear that in mind, that bringing Dhamma and sharing with others is part of our practice as well. All right. So the Buddha's the Buddha's teachings to Nandika are on the topic of four factors. Okay, four factors or four angas. And the word anga here is means factor, but also means limb, which of course works with the simile, right, of the four-footed animal. 4 feet. It's an elephant. Yes, like that. So, and the four limbs are faith, ethics, sila, samadhi, or samatha, and vipassana. Now, those four limbs are also, if you look at it in terms of, say, the gradual training, which we've touched on a few times in the course, begins with gaining faith in the Buddha's teachings. Now, if you don't have faith, then you're not really going to begin practice. You've got to have at least some kind of idea that there is something worthwhile in doing this. Otherwise, you're simply not going to do it. This is that faith. Now, faith might be a very kind of devotional quality and being very devoted to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and it might be, that you love going to the Buddha and offering flowers and doing Bodhi Puja and all of those things. And these are the things that we think of when we think of a faithful Buddhist. But faith can be expressed in many different ways. Sometimes faith is expressed through just an inner sense of commitment. Like if we have a belief that the Buddha was teaching something real and meaningful, then we have that faith in the Dhamma and we have that willingness to commit ourselves to practice the Dhamma. So the faith in the Dhamma always must have that twofold aspect. First of all, faith in the Buddha, or in the Triple Gem, but also faith in ourselves. Why do we have faith in ourselves? Because the Buddha said so. Right? The Buddha, you can't have faith in the Buddha and not have faith in yourself. Right? Because the Buddha said, you can do it. Yeah? The Buddha said, I would not ask you if it were not possible. What I ask you to do, abandon what is unwholesome and develop what is wholesome. It is possible to do that. If it were not possible, I would not ask you. So when we think about the Dhamma practice and think about the Noble Eightfold Path, if we think about it in terms of all the different meditation attainments and all the different achievements and all of these kinds of things, then it all seems a lot. But if we think about it in terms of, can I abandon something unwholesome? Yeah? Actually, it's yes, we can. Every single person here has abandoned an unwholesome thought. At least one in your life. Probably many. I'm going to go out on a limb and say many. Yeah? So we know that this is possible. That is all that the path is. Just keep on doing that. Keep on abandoning what is unwholesome. So this is our faith. So our faith is our commitment to this belief that it is possible for us to practice, to abandon suffering and to develop the Noble Eightfold Path. Yeah? Second one is our ethics. So somebody might have faith, but then they do not have ethics. So again, in the gradual training, having gained faith, then one undertakes the precepts. Then having undertaken the precepts, one develops samadhi, then one develops wisdom. So it's the same process that we're finding here as in the those four factors are still basically the same things as we find in the gradual training. So someone has faith but does not have ethics, does not have sila. Yeah? Now this is not uncommon. You'd think that if you have faith, that then you're going to keep your precepts. Right? Your mind is very good at making excuses. Yeah? And there are many different ways that we can make excuses for things. Sometimes, I don't know if this is the case in Sri Lanka, but sometimes in Thailand people believe that if they practice They have a lot of faith, and they believe that if they practice generosity, they can give to the monks, and then the monks can keep the precepts. You see, this is like skillful outsourcing of the precepts, right? And we're like, I don't know if it quite works that way. So, of course, often life gets in the way, right? And keeping precepts and keeping them well takes an effort and takes a continual effort. Faith is essential, but it's not enough. We have to understand what the precepts are. We have to understand why we should keep them. We have to understand the dangers of not keeping them. And, very importantly, we have to have some community, some people around us who are going to be encouraging and supporting us to keep the precepts. Yeah? This is actually quite a contested sort of space in modern philosophy and modern discourse, without going too much into detail. But there was a Catholic philosopher called René Girard who talks about what he calls mimesis. I was going to say mimosa, but no, that's not right. Mimesis is the mimesis is the basically the practice of imitation. And he pointed out that a lot of our moral and ethical behavior is based on imitation. So essentially, we see someone doing something, and then we do it also. Is the idea. So everything. And he talks about this idea that our desire is triangulated, that we want something because somebody else wants it. Yeah? And this is kind of the basis of advertising, right? We see, there's a, attractive, happy person who likes drinking Coke, so therefore I should like drinking Coke as well. The idea of kind of mimesis. And this idea in modern discourse, especially online discourse, has been kind of weaponized, as these things do, to try to undermine morality. So people use this idea that they say you're a social justice warrior if you try to say let's not be hateful to each other, or they try to say you're living in an echo chamber if you're talking with people who also want to support ethical conduct. Then there's something wrong with you because you're living in an echo chamber. Or if you are proud of doing something good and talk about it, then they'll say, you're virtue signaling, as if this is something bad. All of these kinds of terminology are quite deliberately and consciously chosen in order to undermine the very existence of morality. That's why people do these things. Notice that virtue signaling is wrong, but there's nothing wrong with vice signaling. I can get online and be as mean and cruel and nasty as I like, and nobody says, there's anything wrong with that. But if I say, maybe don't be mean, cruel and nasty, then you're virtue signaling. And so these things are trying to undermine, make no mistake, this is quite deliberate and quite concerted attempt to undermine the very existence of morality. A lot of this kind of culture that does these things, this kind of extremist right-wing culture that does these things, they've studied René Girard, right? And the philosophers from that school, they know what he was talking about, and they know this is how you build morality. You build morality by demonstrating morality, by acting in a moral way and encouraging others to do that. And so they are weaponizing this, turning it upside down. So my plea for you is, don't believe any of this stuff. Don't worry if someone calls you out for virtue signaling or all of these kinds of things. We should be virtue signaling. Signaling virtue is the foundation of morality. That's why we do this. In Buddhist cultures, it's good to signal virtue. We go along, we take precepts, it's good, right? And we encourage each other, and we can celebrate the fact that other people have done good things. Yeah? This is how we build a culture of morality. Yeah? Now, of course, there's another side to that, which is that sometimes people will pretend to be virtuous in public, and yet their private actions betray something else, right? Okay, But that, we already have a perfectly good word for that in English. We call that hypocrisy. Yeah? Right? Hypocrisy is a perfectly good word. Right? Why do we need a new word for it? Right? If someone's a hypocrite, okay, we can criticize them for being hypocritical. But virtue signaling is not that. Criticizing virtue signaling is criticizing the very possibility of having moral conduct in a public space. Yeah? It's very, very kind of dangerous, these kinds of ideologies, because they worm their way into discourse and into consciousness, and people don't really realize what damage and what harm they're doing, and what is the intent, the very deliberate intent of the people who are creating these ideas. So what I'm saying here now is be ethical and be proud of it. Go out and tell people. Signal your virtue. Go on Facebook and say, hey, I kept my precepts for another day today. I feel really proud of myself. Yeah? You know, even say like, I kept one precept today. Maybe I broke all the others, but I kept at least one precept. And feel good about that, yeah? And we should be celebrating each other, you know? If you're at home and if you there's a mosquito which is biting your arm, and then you take the time to capture the mosquito and put it outside instead of squashing it, then great. Go and put a social media post about that, saying I saved a mosquito today. I feel really happy with myself. Yeah? We signal our virtue. Yeah? We should make people understand that it's good to do good things, and it's good to celebrate those good things. Yeah? And it's good to support each other in doing that. Without the support of people around us, it's very, very hard to maintain a culture of goodness. Yeah? And so traditionally, like if you look into Buddhist cultures, traditionally in Buddhist cultures, of course, then that maintenance of that culture of virtue is supported through the local monastery, the local temple in the village, you know, and you come and you take your precepts and you affirm a set of values that you share in common with the community. Now, of course, you don't always live up to those values, right? We're human, okay? We're not always perfect. We know that. We're not fools, right? But we try. We know what it is that we value, and we try to aspire to do something better with our lives. Yeah? And so this is the foundation with living an ethical life. It's understanding that we can try to do better. Try to be better people. Yeah? So if we have faith, but then we don't apply that faith through our actions and keeping our precepts, then we are incomplete in that respect. And notice what the Buddha says. It doesn't say, therefore you're a bad person. Yeah? Right? He's not condemnatory. He's not saying, oh, you should be ashamed of yourself or anything. He's saying that this is incomplete. Right? Any questions on this before I go on? Anne? You don't become self-righteous? Right? Right, yes. Yes. Right? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'm so sorry to hear that you had that conflict with your parents, and I'm sure that you will get through it. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. So we want to be. We want to have that virtue. We want to encourage that in others around us, but at the same time, as you say, to try to avoid being self-righteous. So sometimes, sometimes what happens is that when we are new to something, yeah, we tend to be much more kind of defensive about it. Yeah, and then everyone should be like this, and it doesn't matter what you are. If you give up smoking, then you'll be like, everyone should give up smoking. Yeah? Or if you decide to become a vegetarian, you should be like, everyone should give up meat. Yeah? Or if, whatever it is. So if you decide to give up alcohol, you should be like, why are all these people drinking? It's actually just a defense mechanism because inside yourself you're insecure. Yeah? So when that's coming out, and when you feel that that's coming out, that's giving you a message. It's saying, oh, you went a bit far. Yeah, that's all. Saying you went a bit far, and it comes from that feeling of defensiveness. Yeah? So keep on reinforcing it. You know what's right for you. It's okay. And keep on defending that. And keep on, not keep on defending it, keep on developing that, and then eventually that will become strong, and then you don't need to worry about that. Now in case with the parents, actually this is a part of growing up. It's a part of growing up is to realize that our parents are fallible, yeah, and that sometimes we're going to disagree with them, yeah, and now I look back at how I was when I was a teenager and so on. I disagreed with my parents about some things. And time went on and I realized maybe they had a point. Maybe I should have listened a little bit more on that particular detail. Yeah? But then maybe there are other things where you're like, no, actually they don't have a point. Actually I was right all along. Yeah? And so that is the process of growing up. Yeah? And we learn that with our parents that we have to relate to them as human beings. Yeah? And as human beings, they also have to go through that same process of growth and evolution. Right? This is part of the job of parenthood. Yeah? It's not just you influencing your kids, but it's also you realizing when your kids become grown up and it's time that you have a new kind of relationship with them as adults. Yeah? And so this also, it depends. Some parents do this better than others. Yeah? So sometimes parents themselves get a bit stuck and don't really aren't really able to move into that new phase of a relationship. So see how you go. Maybe you went a little bit far with that one. Okay. Yeah? Back off a little bit and then see how next time. Yeah. Yeah? I'm sure you'll be okay. Yeah. Your parents can't be all bad. They had you. Okay, very good. Anyone else? Okay, we good? We good. Okay, next one. So we're faithful and ethical. When a mendant is faithful and ethical, they're complete in that respect, but they do not get internal serenity of heart. Adhatang ceto samadhisa. Internal serenity of heart. Why have I translated it as serenity instead of samadhi? Ajatang ceto samadhi. I thought it was ajatang ceto samatha, but it's ajatang ceto samadhi. Let me, I'm just going to check that later on. So normally, as we've seen in the suttas, like when we have vipassana, usually vipassana is contrasted with samatha rather than being contrasted with samadhi, even though samadhi has a similar meaning. But in this particular case, it's actually ajatang ceto samadhi instead of ceto samatha. Is that a variant reading? Excuse me. Just no, not even a variant reading. Well, if I would, wait 1 second, I would probably translate it as medical, faithful and ethical, but does not get internal immersion of heart. Let me go and consider that. Anyway, so the Pali is ceto samadhisa. So they're incomplete in that respect. Okay, so again, and I'm sure that we know what that is like. Okay, actually, this is describing many people who are practicing Buddhism. Okay, so many people practicing Buddhism who are faithful, but who are not keeping their precepts and not necessarily keeping virtuous life. So incomplete in that respect. On the other hand, there are many who both have faith and precepts, yeah, and at least try. Maybe not keep precepts perfectly all the time, but try to live a good life and try to live a virtuous life, so that's good, but they don't meditate. Yes? Lots of people like that. Yeah? Probably like most Buddhists. I'm going to go out on a limb. Yeah? Most Buddhists. So one of the things that we try to do is to try to educate and inspire, encourage people to meditate, to practice the Dhamma, because that's part of the path, and because it's really nice and it's really beautiful and you'll be peaceful, and you know what else? It's really cheap. It's cheaper than going on holiday. It's cheaper than like buying a membership at a spa. It's cheaper than taking drugs and all of the other things that people use to get happy, right? You can just sit there, watch your breath coming in and out, and you feel good, right? What could be better than that? We just need a little bit of time and effort and patience, that's all. Seems to be that's the hard part, right? A bit of time and effort and patience. Oh, no thanks. Anyway, so no labhi ajatang ceto samadhisa. I'm really worried about that, to be honest. Anyway, moving on. Incomplete. So they should be faithful and ethical and get internal serenity of heart. Then they are complete in that respect. So now we've got our animal that's gone from 1 leg to 2 legs to 3 legs. Now it's got 3 legs. So at least it can kind of get around. Then they have all of those 3 things, but they don't get the higher wisdom of discernment into principles. So this is a somewhat complicated compound, but the basic meaning is that they're not doing vipassana, right? So they're not developing their wisdom through meditation practice. If we break down the compound, the panya is, of course, the wisdom. Adi panya is the higher wisdom. Yeah, we've seen the adi citta, adi sila, adi citta, adi panya. So when it says higher wisdom, I mean higher wisdom is obviously just a kind of sort of relative description, but higher than what? Generally speaking, I think in the suttas, when it says higher sila, adi sila, adi citta, adi panya, I think what it really means is practicing these things within the context of the Eightfold Path, actually. Yeah, so the adi sila is, you're keeping precepts, that's great, this is your sila. The adi sila is you're keeping precepts with right view and within the context of the path, and this is what makes it adi sila. Similarly with citta, so you're practicing meditation, so you're developing your mind, citta bhavana, that's great. When you're doing adi citta is when you're doing that with right view and developing the Eightfold Path. And similarly with adi panya, so you might have wisdom, might have understanding of various kinds of things, but again, without that right view, then it is not the adi panya. That's what I think it means, but I mean it could be seen from a number of different perspectives. So the adi panya, but that bit's straightforward. Adi panya, pretty straightforward. And then the Dhamma vipassana is a little bit tricky to parse out exactly what it means. So what it seems to mean is to have the vipassana of Dhammas, something like that. And of course Dhamma has many different meanings, so we could call that the insight into the teachings, maybe. We could call it the insight into, and that would make sense, right? So the Dhamma vipassana in that sense means that, you're meditating and you actually realize the truth of the teachings in your meditation. So that's a perfectly good translation. Another one, perhaps you could translate it as phenomena, yeah? Or things, like the 5 khandhas and so on, also makes sense. But I've translated it in the assumption that the sense of Dhamma here is similar to the sense of Dhamma in the 4 Satipatthanas. right? The last of the 4 Satipatthanas, Dhammanupassana. And so there we saw that principles is the appropriate meaning, and I think most likely that's the appropriate sense here. But the other meanings would work just fine as well. So mendicant is faithful, ethical, gets internal serenity of heart, samadhi, and they also get their vipassana, so they are complete in that respect. So this is like a 4-footed animal that is healthy and has all the 4 limbs working. So once again, the overriding purpose and intent of this sutta is to emphasize the essential complementary nature of these things, how they both to be developed and how they both need to be there in balance and harmony working together. And as I mentioned this morning, when the Buddha is talking about samatha and vipassana, this is the overwhelming emphasis. He almost never mentions samatha and vipassana independently. Almost always they come together, and they're always presented in this kind of way to look for a balance. Okay? Questions? Ravi, you go next. Ravi first.
Yeah, it is referred to the 5 precepts or
Well, I mean, literally it's because it's a monastic, so it's a mendicant, so it's the monastic sila. But sure, if it's for a lay person, it would be the 5 precepts.
So, but the 8th precept is more of a training precept or?
Yeah, yes.
Because other than, of course, the 3rd precept being
Right.
of arahantship makes
Right.
sense. But just because I think you sit on a high chair or something like that, I don't think.
That's right, yeah, and those precepts are not, it's not like, there's not anything immoral or unethical about breaking them, right? But it's about, yes, as you say, undertaking a training, yeah. So usually that would be for the uposatha once a week to take them, or you might take the 8 precepts on retreat. But yeah, I mean, I'm a bit equivocal. Sometimes lay people will take the 8 precepts when they're still living in the lay life, because they want to have that commitment, but maybe they don't have the opportunity to ordain or something like that. And I'm kind of a bit equivocal about that. It really depends on what your situation is. I think in some situations for some people then that can work out, but also it can, ends up being kind of really uncomfortable, like you're having family dinner and everybody's eating and you're not, or all of these kinds of things. I mean, it wasn't designed for that situation, it was designed for when you go on retreat, or when, do an occasional practice. So, yeah. So, Nandika repeats the Buddha's teachings, and then goes on to the 5 benefits of listening to the teachings at the right time and discussing the teachings at the right time. Listening and discussing. So obviously this is kind of following on from what the Buddha said, because the Buddha praised Nandika for teaching the Dhamma, and so Nandika then picks that topic up and then uses it as an opportunity for teaching about that. Although, having said, now there's the teaching that follows is a little bit, I'm not sure, a little bit odd, I think. Because he starts out by saying 5 benefits of listening to the teachings at the right time, Dhamma savane, and discussing, okay, fair enough. But actually when he's talking about teaching, deseti. So it seems like what he's actually saying is a bit different from what he says he'll say. I don't know if that's just me, but that's the impression that I get. Anyway, so the first one, mendicant teaches the mendicants the Dhamma that's good in the beginning and the end, that's meaningful and well phrased. Yeah? And so this, of course, is a classic description of the Dhamma, Adi Kalyanang, Majhe Kalyanang, Pariyosana Kalyanang. And again, this is a general phrase that can be read or interpreted many different ways. One way of reading this is that it's good when you first hear about it, when you first you first encounter the Dhamma, It's also then good when you are practicing and you're in the middle of the path, and it's also good when you're at the end of the path and you've completed the Dhamma. So, but there are many different ways in which that phrase can be interpreted. The next phrase also is an interesting part of the description of the Dhamma. Sattang sabhyanjanang, meaningful, with meaning, and with vyanjana, with phrasing. And so this means from the beginning, the Buddha was concerned with these two aspects of the Dhamma. The Dhamma was supposed to have that meaning, but also the form of it is important. Now, elsewhere the Buddha discusses this, and he says, actually the meaning is more important. Okay? So if you've got to keep one of them, keep the meaning. Yeah? But the form is also important because that helps to preserve the meaning. And it's also, like, I think one of the things about that is that, and that one of the things that I've tried to emphasize during this course is that when you abstract things from the suttas and say, well, here are a list of the things that the Buddha taught and the teachings of the Buddha, then it is, you somehow lose something of the detail and the specificity of how the Buddha taught. So being well phrased refers to something about like the clarity with which the Buddha spoke, with the precision that he answered questions, and with all of those kind of details of how he expressed himself, which also is important. And revealed a spiritual practice that is entirely full and pure, kevala paripurnang. Yeah? And so again, the idea here is that the spiritual practice has, the Eightfold Path has everything that you need. It's not lacking, nor is it excessive. Now when you do that, first thing is you become liked and admired by the teacher. Okay? Now, that might seem like a kind of lesser motivation for teaching Dhamma, right? Oh, I'm going to teach Dhamma because then the Buddha will give me some kudos, give me a pat on the back, right? But at least it's a motivation, yeah? And we find that the Buddha himself did this kind of thing sometimes, right? When with our friend Nanda, who we met in the film last night, and the Buddha's like, okay, you know, you want to get married and so on? Okay, come along, ordain, and we'll give you 500 pink-footed nymphs when you go to heaven. And Nanda is like, right. That'll make it all worthwhile. Yeah? And so sometimes it's okay to appeal to that. Even in the Samanyapala Sutta that we saw yesterday, we didn't actually discuss this portion, but when the Buddha is speaking to Ajatasattu, and he says, Ajatasattu says, what are the benefits, the fruits of the ascetic life? The first thing that the Buddha points out is that if somebody within the king's realm, maybe a worker or somebody from lower strata of society then goes forth, then the king would pay them respects. And even the king would honor them and said this is the first benefit. So even though obviously the Buddha was not saying that this is why you should live the holy life or whatever, but sometimes it can be a way of connecting with people who haven't really thought further than that, you know? And so it's a starting point. So it's the first one. Anyway, the second one, then anyway, look, and you might say that maybe we should be teaching Dhamma for a higher purpose than that. I agree. Also, if I'm teaching Dhamma and if the Buddha was to say to me, hey, good job, Sujato, then I'd be pretty happy, pretty pleased with myself. If that, like, that's not likely to happen, for obvious reasons, but if it did happen, I would advise staying away from me for a week or two because I'm probably going to be insufferable, okay? Then furthermore, a mendicant teaches the Dhamma and they feel inspired by the meaning and the teaching in that Dhamma. Yeah? Tasming dhamme attapati sangvedi chahoti dhamma pati sangvedi. This is something I think which is much more meaningful and something which I feel and I experience a lot of the time when I'm teaching Dhamma. Not all the time, unfortunately. But you know, there comes those moments when you really sort of connect with what you're speaking about, and you really you really notice that there is something in there that is really meaningful and really powerful. So the Pali term here is the patisangvedi, Yeah, see the atta patisangvedi. So it's like the inspirational feeling that you get from it. The atta patisangvedi and the Dhamma patisangvedi. Yeah? So this is an interesting one for me as a Dhamma teacher. I've been doing this for a long time now. I've been teaching Dhamma for 20 years, more or less. 20 years? Something like that. On and off, not all the time and not at the same degree all the time. But, it's not the case that every time you give a Dhamma talk that you feel super inspired. No, I wish it were, but unfortunately it's not. And so in a way I think that it's important, again, for those of us who are teaching to keep an eye on that and to try to ask ourselves, what is it that we find inspiring about teaching Dhamma? Yeah? Don't allow yourself to get caught up in just making it, just doing it as a kind of regular thing. What is it that brings us inspiration? Can we try to do that with those things? And this again is something that I learned from Ajahn Brahm, that he was always emphasizing to the monks, if you're teaching a Dhamma talk, make it enjoyable. Make it enjoyable for you. You're the one who has to do it. Somebody else, and even if somebody else doesn't like your talk, oh well, they won't be there for your next talk, but you will be. So you're going to have to enjoy it. Yeah? Otherwise, your life is going to get, pretty depressing after a while. So we have to find some way of finding that inspiration in the Dhamma. Often that means maybe not doing it too much. Sometimes if you're doing a lot, then it gets more just mechanical. Sometimes it means about the context within which you're teaching. Yeah? Sometimes it means about like the manner in which it's done. Like some people prefer to do things a bit more formally. Some people prefer to do it maybe a bit more casually. Some people prefer to teach maybe more from a text. Some people more speak spontaneously. Some people prefer maybe do more of a conversational thing. And so there can be many different ways. It's not the case that there's one right way, but you have to find what is going to be the right way for you. And, I can only suggest to try it out. Try doing a few different things, experiment, challenge yourself, put yourself in a new situation, see what's going to happen, and see how you respond in that kind of situation. And maybe it will be terrible. I've given some Dhamma talks that were terrible. And terrible experiences giving Dhamma talks. Oh my God, not that many of them, thank goodness. One of the worst was when I did this talk for these kids at a school in Singapore. And so the teachers invited me to come and give a talk at their school. And they're like, okay, so you have to understand that this is not just an ordinary school, okay? This school and this particular class is for all of the kids who got kicked out of every other class. And they landed up here in this class together. And these are like the worst kids in the whole education system, right? And no one's been able, we've tried and tried and tried, and no one's been able to do anything with them. Can you come and give them a talk? And I'm like, sure, why not? So I go along and give them a talk, and then after talking for a while, and I tried to, they're like in their teens or whatever, and I tried to, I pulled out all of the tiger stories I knew, I pulled out all of the ghost stories I knew, I tried to do everything that I could to try to make it as fun for them as possible. And then I talked for a while, and then I said, okay, any got any questions? And with one voice, the entire class said, no! So I'm like, okay, all right, nice, well, that was an experience. Anyway, so it happens, right? But try not to make a habit of it. And, for myself, I feel very blessed as a Dhamma teacher because I am able to talk about something that is so beautiful and it's so inspiring. Yeah? And so all of these years later, I still feel that inspiration when I'm teaching. And I'm also very blessed to be able to have that some degree of control and choice in how I'm teaching the Dhamma. I'm not just stuck in a system that tells me that I have to do this many hours and I have to do it this way and so on. I don't know how people do it. Honestly, teachers, professors and so on, have my utmost admiration and respect, because I would be bouncing against the walls in that kind of environment. So try to find that inspiration. Yeah, try to find that inspiration. Sometimes it comes like when you least expect it. Maybe you're tired, maybe you're distracted, maybe you're not in a good mood, and then, I've got to give a Dhamma talk tonight. Oh no, what am I going to give this on? And then sometimes that might be the best way to do it, and you get there, not every time, but then you get there and then something clicks and you're like, why am I feeling like this? I have the opportunity to speak the Dhamma, and then the inspiration can come. All right, so the inspiration of the Dhamma. Next one. Okay, so next one, a mendicant is teaching the Dhamma, and then whenever they do this, they see whenever they do this, they see the meaning of a deep saying in that Dhamma with penetrating wisdom. Tasming Dhamme, in that Dhamma, in that teaching, gambhirang attapadang. Yeah, a meaningful statement. Yeah, gambhirang attapadang. So when it comes to the Dhamma, then things have... See, the Buddha's teaching has this clarity where you can read it and you know what it means. But it also has the depth where you see the hidden connections, you see the implications, you see the relevance of things. And so it often is the case that it's the same teaching that you've taught 100 times before, and then you come to one thing and you realize, actually that one statement, that one word actually has an implication that I didn't realize. This happened to me during this course a number of times. When I'm reading through these suttas, I'm familiar with all of these suttas that we've done. I've translated them all, I've studied them for years, and then I'm seeing something, I'm going, I didn't quite notice that before. Even an example of that, just a random example of that from this morning, when we looked at the four teachings by Venerable Ananda. There's Samatha, Pubbangama, Vipassana, Vipassana, Pubbangama, Samatha, and the Samatha, Vipassana, Yuganadha, and then the fourth one, the Dhammuddhaca. And then we were talking about that, and I said, maybe that's Ananda, because he had this restlessness for the Dhamma. Actually, it never occurred to me before. That was just reading it then, I was thinking, maybe that's why he put that in there, because that was his response. So these things happen, and you're reading. When you're studying, when you're teaching, when you're talking, when you're reflecting. And actually, teaching something, best way to be sure that you know about it. Right? You think you know about it, try to explain it, not so easy. And then somebody asks you a question. Again, this is why, as a teacher, I really love questions. I love people to ask questions. It's really good. Because then I have to look at something in a different way. I have to challenge myself. Otherwise, you can get complacent. So the next one, whenever they do this, the spiritual companions esteem them more highly, thinking, for sure, this venerable has attained or will attain. Again, I'm not entirely convinced by this particular benefit. To be honest, I don't really want you sitting there thinking, I'm sure Sujato's got the good stuff, or if he doesn't, then he'll get it. Why would I want you to think that? I want you to get the good stuff. So I don't know. I can understand, again, as a kind of a motivation for some people, but also the sequence is a bit odd, isn't it? That feels like it belongs with the first one, with the praise by the Buddha one. Maybe the sequence has got out of order. Anyway. So that's the fourth benefit. Then the fifth benefit is really the most important one. Okay, so the trainee's mendicant will hear that, be inspired to practice, and those who are perfected will hear it and be reassured, or not reassured, but will be pleased and will simply live happily ever after. 5 benefits of listening to the teachings at the right time and discussing the teachings at the right time. Although, as I said, it seems to be more the benefits of giving the teaching, but in any case. So I'm not sure, there seemed to be maybe a little bit of textual corruption in that last passage with Venerable Nandika. Maybe a couple of items out of order or something. I'm not sure about that, but maybe if there was a parallel, let's see if there are parallels, then that could be studied to see that. Do we have any parallels? No parallels in Chinese. 1 Padmasaddha. Yeah, this is just that first part of it. It's a partial parallel to that first part. Not really a parallel, to be honest. Partial parallel, yeah. Okay. So it's now 5:10, and we're approaching the end. Do you have any final questions or anything that you would like to say or talk about from the course before we finish up? Thank you, Nicole. It's been great to see you here and great to meet you. Yeah. I mean, for myself, I can just say that, I've enjoyed all of the teaching that I've given and just the opportunity to study. Oh, that's going to come up now, isn't it? Go away. That it's just such a pleasure and a privilege to be able to share the Dhamma, to be able to use these beautiful facilities, and to have such a group of dedicated and inspired and inspiring spiritual companions. Very rare to find in the world. Very rare, okay? So look around the room, look at all of these people, and then you know that these are all special people, okay? These are all people on that highway to Nibbana. Might feel like that we're stuck in the Sri Lankan slow lane of everyone looking for petrol of highway to Nibbana, but at least we're there. At least we're on that road. Yeah. But seriously, it is to find good companions on the holy life is a rare thing in this world. Yeah, so it's very precious. So one of the most important things we can do at retreats like this is just bring people together. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why I didn't make too much of a emphasis on like keeping silence and meditation on the retreat. It's up to you if you want to meditate, but I think it's also really valuable just to get to know people a bit, have those conversations, and hopefully that you will have made some friends who will stay with you after the retreat.